So what we're going to do today is we're going to go briefly over what I think you need to remember for your life, from what I spoke last class. What I wanted to do with the first class was to really lay a foundation so that you guys can have an appreciation for the opportunity that we all have to be in this industry. It took a lot of people working really, really hard for very long periods of time for us to be able to even sit here to have this course. So I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, that, you know, this is a very serious and important industry that we're part of. And then I'm going to talk to you about what you really need to remember that you might need to keep in mind for the final. And you're like, what final? You didn't tell me about no final. You want me to talk about the final a little bit now? The final is just a presentation. Usually it's a group presentation. I'm still gonna keep it a group presentation for one reason. The reason is we are in a time where we're all having to work with groups without having to physically be with them. People are actually getting hired and getting new jobs without actually physically meeting their employers. So I think it's gonna be important for you to know how to work together in a team to create something and present it to me at the end. So basically, you're gonna tell me how you as an entrepreneur are going to start your marijuana business in the state. How do you walk through licensing? What I usually offer to students, this could be your actual business plan. Like you guys actually want to start a marijuana business and you want me to help you go through it. So I would give you regular consulting and teach you how to get through it. Otherwise, you can just do a fake business and walk me through licensing that business. It's pretty easy, and people usually have fun doing it. And like I mentioned, a lot of my students are in the cannabis space now, so I'm convinced that this helps. Okay, does that seem easy enough? So don't worry, my objective, please absorb as much as you can in these classes. I want you to have enough so that you can, when you go out and you work in the cannabis space, you remember some of the things that I said, and then you can go and look them up yourself. Got it? Because that's how this industry works, and it's evolving so much. There's actually a slide that I have in here with new laws that are being passed. So this skill is going to be really great. All right, ready? Good. So what I want you to remember from last class, I need you to remember what the definition of marijuana is and what the definition excludes. Okay. So what is marijuana? Y'all remember? Marijuana is the cannabis sativa L plant, right? And it's all parts of it, whether it's growing or not. It includes the seeds. It includes the resin, which is like that sticky substance that's on the from the plant, and every compound, mixture, etc., that you can make from the plant, its seeds or the resin. What's not included, y'all? You don't have the stalks of the plant. Hemp is excluded. Fiber produced from the stalks is excluded. Oil made from the seeds excluded. And any compound mixture preparation that's made from the mature stalks, fiber, oil, or cake, and any sterilized seed of such plant. Now, I know that you guys are like, Laury, you said you cannot sell the sterilized seed. It includes the sterilized seed of such plant. But didn't you tell me the first day of class that you are an owner of a genetics company that sells marijuana seeds? And that company is not necessarily licensed? I did tell y'all that, right? So do I need a license for my seed company based off the definition of marijuana? Because I do, right? Good. So you guys are following. So now you're seeing a lot of people selling seeds. That is very illegal. It's a very gray market. If you guys want to get into the seed business, what do I recommend that you do? I would recommend what you would call a white label deal. Just get together with a product manufacturing company or a cultivation company or retailer and ask them to take the product for you, run it through their metric system, and they do that through your brand, and you never have to have a marijuana license. We can talk more about these creative deals about getting into the industry. I'm going to spill them in as this continues, because I need y'all to figure out how to get in here quick because it's hot. All right, you ready? We're going to keep going. So we talked about marijuana and THC, how they're both covered by the Controlled Substances Act because the federal government believes that marijuana has a high potential for abuse, that there is no currently accepted medical use in treatment in the US, and they lack safety for use under medical supervision. Remember that? Good. See, you guys are learning so much. Okay, so we talked about THC being included in that, and we talked about hemp being excluded from the definition of marijuana and being legal now because our good friend McConnell the Turtle. The reason stop, Laury. I'm gonna bring it back. I'm gonna try to get through this class and be completely serious, starting now. He wanted his farmer friends to give some bread. He wanted his farmer friends to get some money and to really participate in the industry. And so he helped legalize hemp. Okay, that's it for last class. Y'all ready to get into medical marijuana? Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys that I already told you that I already feel a certain way about the medical marijuana program because when I tried to start my business, the barriers to entry were enormous. And we'll talk about what those barriers were. And I feel personally insulted by it. And so I'm gonna have a lot of shady tones when I go through this material. I apologize ahead of time. All right, okay, let's go. So medical marijuana. Do you guys know that medical marijuana actually has some federal protections? In that if you're in the medical marijuana space, you're not as likely to get arrested. Like you're not, the federal government does not have the capacity to arrest you to the extent that they would for adult use. Have you heard of this? No? Great. Boom. So here enters the Ravrah Blumenauer Amendment. And that's the last time I'm saying that, because after that, I just call it the Ravrah Amendment. All right? Okay, so this amendment, what it does is it prevents the Department of Justice from using any funds made available through the Appropriations Act to enforce the Controlled Substances Act against illegal medical marijuana programs. Are you following? So what this amendment does is it does not deschedule marijuana, but what it says is federal government, you cannot, Department of Justice, you can't use any of the money that we've given to you to enforce the Controlled Substances Act. You got to find some other way. Have you ever found, how do you enforce a law if you don't have money to enforce it? It's effectively unenforceable. So that's what this amendment does for medical marijuana. And we know why we would have an amendment for it. It's because, you know, medical marijuana is designed to protect patients. And when we have patients in mind, it's easier to get things of this sort passed. So, like I mentioned, it does not deschedule marijuana. So this amendment is passed through the appropriations bill. So the regular appropriations bill, it's passed annually. So every year they have to pass it, and it covers one fiscal year. The federal government's fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th of the following year. So as you guys can tell, it's almost time to update this amendment. And every year people get less scared that it's not going to be renewed. As you would imagine, the first year people were stressing. When Trump became president, people were really terrified that he was not going to renew it, but he ended up renewing it every year since. So it's up for renewal. Let's see if it gets renewed. All right. Does anybody here know what the difference between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana is? There is no difference, you guys. Absolutely no difference between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. The difference takes place at the point of sale. It all has to do with how it's entered into metric. In fact, entering your product into metric as medical marijuana or adult use is so important that companies have already been slapped with penalties for failing to switch over their medical marijuana from metric to adult use. That's a pretty small mistake, but in the eyes of the CCC, it's a huge mistake, deserving penalties. So you have to be very careful. And that's why there's so much opportunity for you guys as compliance officers, if you wish, because there's a lot to comply with, and the CCC does not play. Okay. Are you guys ready to know specifically what's going on here in Massachusetts in the medical marijuana program and why Big Mama has been so salty? Hashtag Lowry's. That's just, okay, anybody who knows Kanye West, that's to him. Okay, I kind of feel like one day all these celebrities are going to watch my classes. They're going to be like, okay, thanks for the shout out, Big Mama. Okay, so what's going on in Massachusetts? So in Massachusetts in 2012, when I was still at Suffolk University, Massachusetts legalized medical marijuana, okay? Ballot question 3 passed with 63.3% of Massachusetts voters saying that we, the people, think that our patients deserve to have an alternative method of healing, and so we legalize medical marijuana. And so Chapter 369 of Mass Gen laws of the Acts of 2012 was enacted. So initially, when the law was written, the medical marijuana program was written, the agency that was responsible for overseeing it was the Department of Health. And the reason for that is they were contemplating patients and they would be the best ones suited to deal with this. But they weren't. Okay, Big Mama's gonna be honest with you. They weren't prepared to deal with this because this is different and apart from ordinary medicine, because it's littered with stigma, littered with a history of prohibition that's unseen by, Zoloft. So they just didn't know what to do with it. So in December 31, 2018, the DPH got the boot, and the Cannabis Control Commission took over regulation of the medical marijuana program. So what that means is if you want a medical marijuana program, if you want a medical marijuana license, any of that sort, you have to go through the Cannabis Control Commission instead of the Department of Health. Got it? Okay, so what does this program allow you to do, y'all? I'm glad you asked. So in Massachusetts, the medical marijuana program allows a registered qualifying patients, and I'm going to define all these terms for you, to obtain a 14-day or 60-day supplies of medical marijuana, also going to define that, from a registered marijuana dispensary, from a personal caregiver, or through hardship cultivation. Have y'all heard of any of these things? I hope so, I hope not. Okay, pursuant to written certifications issued by a certifying healthcare provider. Y'all got that? That's what the medical marijuana program allows you to do in a nutshell. So now let's get into it a little bit more. So let's talk about the key players in the medical marijuana program. So we just talked about the medical marijuana program allows patients to obtain medical marijuana for their own treatment pursuant to a written certification from a certified healthcare provider. Okay, you got it? We're going to go into it. All right. So who are these healthcare providers? So in order for you to be able to access the medical marijuana program, a healthcare provider has to issue you a written certification. So let's talk about the qualifications for you to even be a healthcare provider in the state. So there are 3 types of healthcare providers in Massachusetts that are permitted to issue a written certification. Those are certifying physicians, certified nurse practitioners. I don't even know why they did that. And the certifying physician assistant. The certifying physician assistant is new. They added this in the last revision of the why am I blanking on this, of the regulations. Couldn't remember regulations, y'all. So before, the only individuals who could issue a written certification was a physician and a nurse practitioner. Now the PAs can get in the game too. All right. What is a healthcare provider? A healthcare provider is a Massachusetts licensed physician assistant, a certified nurse practitioner. So if you're licensed to practice medicine in Connecticut, you cannot be a healthcare provider in Massachusetts unless you also unless you're also licensed to practice in Massachusetts. Y'all following? Good. And you're qualified to issue written certifications for the medical use of marijuana. In order for you to be a healthcare provider within the context of the medical marijuana program, you have to have a bona fide healthcare provider-patient relationship with that with the client. At this point, you're like, what's a bona fide healthcare provider-patient relationship? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Okay, it's a relationship between the certifying healthcare provider acting in the usual course of his or her professional practice. That's important. And a patient, in which the healthcare provider has conducted a clinical visit, completed and documented a full assessment of the patient's medical history and current medical conditions, has explained the potential benefits and risks of marijuana use, and has a role in the ongoing care and treatment of the patient. So you can't just be, outside of Dunkin' Donuts just issuing out written certifications. You really, you really have to have a relationship. You have to have conducted a clinical visit. You need to look up their medical history. You need to explain to them the benefits and the risks of marijuana use, and you need to be in their lives, okay? You can't be an absentee. It's like an absentee father, an absentee doctor or care provider. You got to be in their life, okay? I'm not sure. I know you're saying has an ongoing role in care. I'm pretty sure that it just has to last within the relationship of within the context of them needing to have the certification. Because if I go to my doctor this month and I get a certification, and then I switch doctors, do I have to keep the relationship with that doctor? So those are the issues that come up, and the answer to that is, and the real issue is, how do you define ongoing care and treatment? Like, what is ongoing? Is 2 visits enough? Is 3 visits? No one knows. You just got to keep going. No one knows, because this has not been litigated, and we haven't received any feedback on this from the CCC. Next, I was talking generally about healthcare providers in general. Now let's break down the different types of healthcare providers. Y'all coming with me on this journey? Let's go. First place we go, certifying physician. What do you need? Like I mentioned before, you gotta be from Massachusetts. No new friends here. If you're not from Massachusetts, you gotta make sure that you join the family by getting your license here, or else you can't prescribe medicine. Also, to be a certifying physician, you have to certify that in your professional opinion, not personal, because if it was personal, they'd all give the weed, right? But in the professional opinion, the potential benefits of the medical use of marijuana would likely outweigh the health risks for a qualifying patient. So the burden is really low here. Why? Because doctors don't want a high burden. If the burden was too high, doctors would be like, I don't want to even deal with this, okay? So it's a very low burden for a certifying physician. What are the qualifications? For a physician, you have to have at least 1 place of practice in Massachusetts. So in addition to being licensed here, you have to have at least 1 place of practice here. You have to have an active license with no restrictions to prescribing. And then you also have to hold a controlled substances registration from the DPH. So we can't get rid of the DPH. They're still always in the mix, right? To register, you register online. You don't need much, just the name, license number, registration, your controlled substances number, and any other information. They don't really need much for the registration process. Well, let's talk about the term of the certification. Once you obtain a certification as a physician, it lasts forever. That means you do not need to renew it. The only time that it will end is if your license to practice medicine is suspended, revoked, or restricted. Your controlled substances registration is also suspended or revoked. You voluntarily agree not to practice medicine in Massachusetts. You fraudulently issued written certifications of a debilitating medical condition. Number 4 is important because it's very easy to fall into a trap where your friend comes to your house and like, yo, my back's been hurting me. And it could get really tough if you don't follow those steps where you have a clinical visit, where you look up their medical history, where you talk to them about the risks. If you don't do all of that, it's going to be a fraudulent certification and you're at risk of losing your certification. You also have to complete continuing professional development courses as part of this. And the other way that your registration can terminate is if you surrender it. Are you guys following? You good? So if you, it depends on why you lose the certification, right? But if you lose a certification for writing something that's fraudulent, I can't guarantee this, but I'm pretty certain that that doctors take oaths to be of integrity, right? So they would probably violate the professional code of conduct of the medical license by virtue of violating this one, which it would impact that license. They're not related. They're not regulated by the same entities, but that's how that's how one license can impact another license. Thanks for that question. Let's go. Where we at? So we talked about the physicians. Now let's talk about certifying certified nurse practitioners, CMPs. Based off what you learned about the physicians, you can pretty much guess how the legislature wrote these provisions, right? So you have to be a Massachusetts nurse practitioner. You have to certify that in your professional opinion, the potential benefits of medical marijuana would outweigh the health risks, right? Same thing. You have to have at least one place to qualify as a CNP. You also have to have at least one place of practice in Massachusetts. Have a full license to prescribe with no restrictions. You have to have obviously your nursing license. You have to have a controlled substances registration, and also complete your continuing education requirements. Likewise, you register online. In the term very similar to physicians, you you maintain the license indefinitely, unless the CNP does the same things like the physician, gets the nurse license revoked voluntarily, gets up out of Massachusetts, has board authorization to practice nursing in Massachusetts revoked, fraudulent certifications, so etc. Now you guys probably get the deal, right? So what about a CPA? They have to be licensed in Massachusetts, right? They have to certify that in their professional opinion that the medical use of marijuana would likely outweigh the risk for a qualifying patient. Now I'm going to stop here, now that we've gone through the three types, to ask to just point out that the standard for a physician, they're holding the PAs when a PA gives you a written certification. The standard they're being held at is the standard of a PA. A physician's being held at a physician standard. A nurse is being held at a nurse's standard of practice. Keep that in mind, because this is going to come into play when we discuss certifying patients who are younger than 18. All right, and again, similar to the nurse practitioners and the physicians, you gotta have one place of practice in Massachusetts. All your licenses gotta be up to par, right? Including your controlled substances app license. You register online. Once registered, the license is indefinite unless you do the same things that the others couldn't do, right? To keep your license. Is this making sense? I hope so. All right. So now let's get back to certifying healthcare providers as a whole. So we talked about the physicians, what it requires to be a physician, a nurse practitioner, and a physician's assistant. So these group of healthcare providers, what aren't they permitted to do? What are some of the limitations? Well, they each have to abide by their standard of conduct, like I mentioned before. Physicians have to apply with generally accepted standards of medical practice, CMPs, nursing practice, PAs, physician assistants. A CHP, a certifying healthcare provider, cannot delegate their authority to diagnose patients as having a debilitating medical condition. You cannot delegate it. It has to be done by you. You can only issue these certifications to a qualifying patient with whom you have, what I say, a bona fide healthcare provider-patient relationship. So we talked about that and we defined what that is. You cannot issue a written certification to yourself. You cannot do it to your family members. And the reason why I think this is great, if I was a doctor, I don't know about y'all, but I got a lot of cousins. And my cousins will be at my house. Yo, Laury, I think my back hurt. My hair won't grow, like random stuff. So this protects the patient too from intrusive friends. So from intrusive family members. Okay. If you want, you can issue certifications to your employees or coworkers, but you have to go through the same process. That's important because an employee may not want their boss going through their medical records, which is required if you have to issue a certification. So those are the limitations on the certifying healthcare providers. So how do you get your registration revoked if you're a certifying healthcare provider? Again, if you're being fraudulent, don't write no fraudulent certifications, bruh. You'll be all right. You have to, if you fail to comply with any of the requirements of the statutes or regs, that's a very broad one. And if you issue written certifications without completing your professional development credits and any other grounds that serve the purpose of the medical marijuana program. So if you take actions that might endanger public health or actions that might lead to diversion, things of that sort, even though it's not explicitly stated in these regs, your actions could be sufficient to cause the CCC to revoke your registration. Okay. So that's the way it's revoked. Revoke means that the CCC has to actively take action to remove your registration. But void means that it's automatic, that the CCC doesn't have to do anything for it. So let's talk about what causes a certifying healthcare provider's registration to be void. If you're no longer active, if your license is no longer active, obviously, that makes sense, right? If you're not practicing medicine or nursing, or you're not a PA anymore, if your controlled substances registration is suspended or revoked, and if you surrender your registration, it's automatically void. A void certifying healthcare registration is inactive and invalid, like Big Mama said. Last time I tried to update it, the medical marijuana program hadn't been updating their program, but I can do that. Remind me at the end of the class to show you how many doctors we have in it. I'll check to see if it's updated, but I'm not sure about that. I do know we have like 40,000, around a little bit, between 30 and 40,000 patients last time I checked, around this time last year, but I haven't got new data. So remember I told you guys that before I went into marijuana, I was a healthcare attorney, and I was both regulatory and I also got to practice litigation. And the litigation that I did revolved a lot of unfair trade within the healthcare field. And I don't know if you guys know this, but in the medical field, you cannot trade and operate like a regular business. You cannot receive anything of value in exchange for a referral. That is sufficient for you to face criminal and civil charges, depending on if you're a doctor, if you're anywhere in the chain. Y'all following me? Why would they have those in place in the medical field as opposed to like the automotive industry? Why do you think it's important that the federal government said you cannot receive any remuneration, anything of value in exchange for referring someone to a medical provider or service? It's patient protection. So with that in mind, understand that a lot of this is in place because they're trying to protect people from the ills and the risks of cannabis, and they don't want marijuana companies incentivizing patients to go to go and use marijuana. They don't want it to be, they want it to be for actual medical purposes. You're following me? So with that, let's go into the unfair trade. So if you're a certifying healthcare provider, if you're a certifying healthcare provider's coworker, if you're their employee, or even their immediate family member, you cannot ever directly or indirectly accept or solicit from or offer to an RMD a board member, executive of an RMD, any RMD personnel, or any other person associated with an RMD, or a personal caregiver, anything of value. So what I just say? I just said if you're a healthcare provider, meaning I'm a physician, I'm a nurse practitioner, I'm a physician's assistant who is issuing written certifications, I can't ever give anything of value to any RMD personnel, or any other person, any caregiver, okay? You can't give them gifts. Isn't that crazy? I thought we were supposed to be nice. Sharing is caring. Not in marijuana, y'all. Not in marijuana. Okay. But now you see why they would do that. Now that I've explained the whole purpose, the whole policy behind these unfair trade provisions. Okay, next. You cannot offer a discount or any other thing of value to a qualifying patient based on the patient's agreement or decision to use a particular personal caregiver or RMD. Now, RMDs, medical dispensaries, are allowed to give patient discounts, but they can't give a discount in exchange for a promise. A CHP, a certified healthcare provider, cannot give a discount to one of their patients in exchange for a promise that they're going to use like Netta. Does that make sense? Or that they're going to use me as a caregiver. Next, they can't examine or counsel a patient or issue a written certification at an RMD. Have you guys ever wondered why you can't just show up to a medical marijuana dispensary and get certified right there? It's because of this provision. They're not allowed to do these certifications in there because they're afraid that it would incentivize doctors to just put up shop there doctors to put up shop there in the medical marijuana, to put doctors there to kind of grow that market without necessarily having those patients need medical marijuana. Next, you cannot directly, you cannot have a direct or indirect financial interest in an RMD if you are a certified healthcare provider. So now you got to make a real good decision. Do I want to be issuing written certifications, or do I want to own an RMD? Because that's a real financial decision. It's also a moral, professional decision. But just know that you will probably not make as much money issuing written certifications as you would running an RMD. But I have friends. One of my friends, actually, Keeber Smith. She's in Colorado. She's in Connecticut. Hopefully, I've been talking to her to come to the class. That's what she does in Connecticut. She has companies set up all around the state that issues written certifications to patients. Now, that's a very great state to do that because they don't have adult use. And so they need certification. So there's a need for her business. But in a place like Massachusetts, where we started with businesses like Keebra's, but then we're starting to see fewer and fewer of them in existence, because you don't need a registration in order for you to purchase adult use. All you need is a state issued ID, right? Is this making sense to y'all? And also, is the industry starting to come alive? This is my favorite part of the class, when you start seeing the pieces and you're like, yo, I get this. Next stop, your own business. Okay, maybe I'm too early. Let's get through medical marijuana. What time is it? 8:30. I'm doing real good on time. Okay. Moving on. Any questions?
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a difference in the regulation for the individual use, whether it's medical or it's adult use?
On a federal level, is there a difference? So on a federal level, it's still illegal. It just says if you're under the medical marijuana program, they're not going to be able to use their resources to enforce the law against you. I also want to give you guys another little benefit of the medical marijuana card in Massachusetts. Because I personally, I've done really good so far. I have not been that spicy about the medical marijuana program, because I personally think it's starting to be slightly a little bit pointless. The only reason why it's still great is because in order for you to obtain marijuana in the adult use market, how old do you have to be? 21. I didn't teach you that yet. But you have to be 21 in order for you, and this is coming up later on in tonight's class, But in order for you to be a medical patient, you have to be 18 years old, but not really. If you can actually even be a patient if you're under 18, and I'll talk to you about that. So that's another benefit. If you're between 18 and 20, that's the only way you can obtain marijuana legally here and have it delivered to your home. What's the other benefit? You're like, Big Mama, there are a lot of benefits. I don't know why you're so mad at it. Leave me alone, okay? You're not my therapist. So the other thing is, so in Massachusetts, the Supreme Judicial Court said you can, if you fail a drug test because of your marijuana use, that failed drug test result cannot be used as a reason for denying your employment or removing you from your position of employment. So you're effectively protected. So if anybody here, people always call me in a panic, you guys, you don't understand. Laury, I have a job interview and they're gonna drug test me. What do I do? First, where do you live? In Massachusetts? Bet. I need you to call Caregivers Docs. Make an appointment as soon as possible. When you're at Caregivers Docs, it's gonna cost you about $200 to make that appointment. They're gonna do that stuff. They're gonna do a clinical visit, right? They're going to look at your medical history. They're going to explain to you the pros and cons of medical marijuana use, and they're going to maintain that ongoing relationship that's required for you. And then they're going to issue your written certification that you can then take to the CCC, get your medical marijuana card, take that card, bring it to your boss, and tell them to try me. Okay? If you must quote Dej Loaf, okay, I don't know if you know about Dej Loaf, tell them to try me, because then they will not be permitted to legally. I know some of y'all are thinking, who let this girl teach this class? You bet, again, go talk to Dean Perlman. I do know people who, have guns legally, but are users of this plant. So technically, you're not. The reason why technically, if you use marijuana, period, you're not allowed to have a gun. But when you have the medical marijuana card, they can research you. You show up. I don't even know if they're going to be denied based off it, because I literally have friends with medical cards with guns. I don't know if they talk to each other.
And then,
you know how those things go with registrations. You might have one really serious person who does their job really well, and they cut you off, and people who don't do. So I really don't know how they're handling that over there.
True.
I actually know this company who does training, gun training. I could probably have him come and talk about his experience. So no, because that's just for state. The feds can do what they want.
Yeah.
But technically, the Supreme Judicial Court's law violates the federal government's. It's a weird, twisted world we live in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I love questions. There are. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they're called Reciprocity States. So what is a written certification? A written certification is a form that we issue to the CCC, so that that is issued to the CCC, so that a patient may obtain their certification. So a written certification must be issued by a healthcare provider, certified healthcare provider. And they have to certify that the patient has a debilitating medical condition, and that will enable the patient to obtain the certification. So the certification has to describe the qualifying patient's pertinent symptoms. It has to specify the patient's debilitating medical condition, and I will list out what those debilitating medical conditions are for you. And they have to state that in the physician's professional opinion, the potential benefit of the medical use of marijuana would likely outweigh the health risks for the patient. Remember that. So what are some of the debilitating medical conditions in Massachusetts? So it's cancer, glaucoma, positive status of HIV, AIDS, hepatitis C, ALS, Crohn's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. Now you're like, Big Mama, you made it seem as if I could just get a headache and get a medical card. Okay, first of all, I need you to relax with that energy, because this last bullet point where it says, other debilitating conditions as determined in writing by a qualifying patient's healthcare provider basically opens this up to whatever's wrong with you. So you go to your doctor, and if the doctor at Caregivers Docs, or I only know Caregivers Docs because I know one of the founders. She was very nice to me when I first went into the industry. And so there are other companies doing it too. So go find the one that suits you if you need a medical card. But the doctors there will be able to help you find the best path to your card. So what does debilitating mean? It means that it causes weakness. Because Shakespeare, a lot of these words, bro, I'm like, you guys know English is my third language. Don't do this to me. Wasting syndrome, intractable pain, or nausea. So what does this mean? There's just weakness, massive weight loss, anything where it causes you to lose a lot of weight, you're nauseous, you have pain that does not go away, or it impairs your strength or ability. And so to be debilitating, you either cause weakness, or they're wasting away, they have pain, or they have issues with strength or ability, and it's progressing. The illness is progressing to such an extent that one or more of the patient's major life activities is substantially limited. Does that make sense? So in order for it to be debilitating, so if it's other debilitating condition, you have to make sure that it causes weakness or impairs strength or ability. And remember when we're talking about the risks, that they have to talk about the risks and the benefits. So presumably the doctor would have reviewed the record, because they have to review their medical record. And in reviewing the medical record, they would know what this particular patient is predisposed to. And they would have to. So that the doctor would be liable for not discussing these issues. We're moving on to treatment of past diagnosis. So what this slide is basically saying, if you were issued a medical marijuana card for a particular condition in the past, and you show up to a doctor's office in the present, you're not going to simply get a medical marijuana card just because you're not simply going to get issued medical marijuana simply because you had that existing condition. Okay, just because you were diagnosed. You have to prove that your condition is not being ameliorated by the medical marijuana. Like, if I stop giving it to you, you're going to get worse. You have to prove that that you still have the active condition, and that you're undergoing treatment for the condition. Does that make sense? If you had it in the past, you can't get a medical marijuana card for just because you had it in the past. You have to prove that you had it in the past and medical marijuana is not currently being used to keep you well. And that you have the active condition, and that you're still undergoing treatment for it. Like I mentioned, we talked about some of these briefly before. If in order for a certified healthcare provider to issue a written certification, what they got to have with you? A bona fide healthcare provider-patient relationship. I really need them to have like shorter terms for these things. Relationship with qualifying patients. You have to conduct a clinical visit, right? In this the clinical visit is required for an initial written certification. This is important. If you're renewing the certification, it could be done through the telephone. You don't have to show up. The clinical visit is required at least once a year. The CHP has to use the Massachusetts Prescription Monitoring Program. Another reason why people don't like to use the medical marijuana program is that every ounce of marijuana that you buy is logged into the state's program. People who are private don't like the government keeping track of how much weed they smoke. And so that's one reason why people don't necessarily like the medical marijuana program. They feel like it's they all up in your business, okay? Yes, I'm going to talk about that too. And they have this thing where it's not hardship cultivation. You have to provide individuals who cannot afford marijuana cheap or free cannabis if they're a patient. So there's that as well. But yeah, that's true. There are some benefits. Okay, you guys, I know you're like, Laury, relax. You need to forgive now. Okay, I'm hearing you. Okay, so what else? You complete and document. So to issue it, again, bona fide relationship, clinical visit, once a year. You don't need it if you're in, you don't need to do a in-person clinical visit if you're renewing. Now that we're in COVID, I don't even know what they're doing with these. It's probably all, it's actually, I know exactly what they're doing. As a result of COVID, they actually changed this requirement and they turned it to, they allowed people to do telehealth visits instead of having to go in person for the initial written certification. So now it's easier for you guys. So use, where else? They have to explain the potential benefits and risks of marijuana and play a role in the ongoing care and treatment of the patient. If they don't do that and something happens to the patient, like you were talking about, I didn't see who asked the question, but you know, they don't play an ongoing role. They don't explain the risk. The doctor is at risk for getting into trouble with the state of Massachusetts. Okay. There are two types of certifications. You can either certify for a 14-day supply or a 60-day supply. A 14-day supply is the amount that they think that a patient would need for 14 days of treatment. And that is 2.5 ounces of weed. So you can have a 14-day supply or a 60-day supply. A 60-day supply is 10 ounces of marijuana. Okay? Now, a certified healthcare provider can determine that a 2.5 ounces is insufficient for a 14-day supply, in that the patient might actually need more than 2.5. They might need 3 ounces, 4 ounces. So they can actually increase the amount of marijuana that the patient can have for that 14-day supply. What they can't do is make it like a 16-day supply and make it like 17 days, but they can increase the amount. Is that making sense? Good. But in order for you to do that, you have to document the amount, the certifying healthcare provider, and they have to provide the rationale in the medical record and in the written certification as to why they've increased the amount. And again, for that qualifying patient, that increased amount, so if they went from 10 ounces to 20 ounces in 60 days, that 20 ounce would then be their new 60-day supply. So we went through certified healthcare providers, right? We went through the 3 certified healthcare providers. We went through what a written certification is. What do you have to do to be a qualifying patient in Massachusetts? Good. So to be a qualifying patient, a qualifying patient is a patient who was formally and validly issued an annual registration card by DPH. Why is that important? Because I told you guys that DPH used to oversee medical marijuana. When they transferred over December 31, 2018, some people still had some lingering registrations. I think they should all be done by now, TBH. So I should update them because I don't think anybody should have any lingering registrations. And is currently and validly issued a temporary or an annual card from the CCC. So a registered qualifying patient, in a nutshell, is anybody who's been issued a registration card from the CCC. How do you get a registration card? Is basically the card that the CCC gives you once you've submitted your written certification to the CCC in your application. So to be a qualifying patient, the path to qualifying patient differs based on your age. If you are at least 18 years old, to be a patient, you have to be a Massachusetts resident. So now, again, you can't come from other states and be registered unless you're a resident here. You have to have been diagnosed by a Massachusetts licensed healthcare provider, okay, as having a debilitating medical condition. And we talked about what those debilitating medical conditions were. Remember? It's those very hard and tough diseases and anything else that your doctor says. So that's all you need to be a patient in Massachusetts if you're 18 years old. But what if you're not 18 years old? What if you're 17? Well, you have to be a Massachusetts resident and you have to be diagnosed by 2 licensed certifying physicians. That's different. An adult can be certified by a PA, by a nurse practitioner. They could be certified by the physicians. In the case of children, Only physicians can certify them. Why do you think that is? It's for the same reason that I kept talking about earlier. It is the standard of care that they're held to. Physicians are held to a higher standard of care within this context, and you need two of them in this context to certify a child. One of them has to be a pediatrician or board certified pediatric subspecialist. So it's really hard to obtain a medical card if you're under 18. And you also have to have a debilitating medical condition that is also life limiting. So you got to be in pretty bad shape. To be life limiting, it has to be a debilitating medical condition that does not respond to curative treatment. And reasonable estimates of prognosis suggest that death may occur in 2 years. Yeah. So if you're 17 and under, it's really tough to get a medical card, but there's always a way out. The exception to this life-limiting illness diagnosis requirement is this. The physician may issue the certification if they're younger than 18, if they don't have a life-limiting illness, if the physicians determine that the benefits of medical use outweigh the risks. You see how this is different than what was before. For someone who is 18 and above, it just has to be likely that it would help them, right? That it likely outweighs the, but here you have to prove, in the case of a 17-year-old, that the benefits of medical marijuana outweigh the risks. So the standard here is higher for a child who does not have a life-limiting illness. In addition, the physician must, again, discuss the potential negative impacts or neurological development with the parents or legal guardians, obtain written consent from the parents or legal guardians, and document the rationale for issuing written certifications in the medical records and written certifications. So registration cards, there are two types. There are temporary ones and there are annual ones. The temporary ones typically last, I think the temporary ones are like a 2-week. Let's see, you have the and then you have the annual ones. To obtain both temporary and annual ones, you apply the same way. You get a written certification, you submit it to the state. Why would you get a temporary versus an annual card? Like, what would possess someone to get a card that's for for about 14 days instead of like for a year? It has to do with the ailment. So say the doctor gives you a medical card for a sprained ankle, and you know the sprained ankle is only going to take 2 weeks. Well, the doctor is not going to issue you a card for a whole year when the issue might resolve itself in 2 weeks. Does that make sense? So it's for shorter ailments. I have to reiterate, I put a lot of information on these slides so that when you go home, well, you're home, so you can have it for yourself, because there are no books. So I'm not going to go through everything on the slides in detail in every single instance. If you see me blowing through slides, know that I put it in there for your FYI when you go through it, because there might be some holes when you're reading it, but Big Mama is not going to do it all unless you want me to assign you reading. You're going to be like, stop threatening me with readings. I will not. All right. So again, what I want you to remember though is a temporary card lasts for 14 days, and you can only issue a patient is limited to one 14-day temporary registration within a 365-day period. If you need more, you're gonna have to go and get a longer, an annual registration. So the annual registration is valid for 1 year, and that's it. Any questions about about being a qualifying patient? Good. Next stop, personal caregivers and hardship cultivation. Somebody just mentioned Maine. In Maine, I personally believe that Maine was doing it right, because in Maine, personal caregivers, my very first business partner was a personal caregiver in Maine. And in Maine, he was allowed to have a 5,000 square foot facility because he was allowed to combine his license with the licenses of other caregivers and essentially have a very 5,000 square feet ain't nothing to play with of canopy in providing cannabis directly to patients. That was an excellent opportunity. And I think if the cannabis industry wanted to establish equity, this would have been the ways to do it, because it would have allowed those in the black market to seamlessly transfer their clientele, right? But who am I? No one ever listens to Big Mama. Actually, what I'm talking about was actually proposed recently. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the developments surrounding personal caregivers in the medical marijuana program in the state. You guys ready to know? Do you guys even know what a personal caregiver is? A personal caregiver is a person who is validly registered with the commission, who's 21 years old or older, and who agrees to assist a qualifying patient's medical use of marijuana. So they help them do a number of things: pick up the marijuana, ingest the marijuana, cultivate it, drive them to the store, drive them to pick it up. So it's anybody who assists a qualifying patient in their use of the marijuana. A personal caregiver cannot be the registered qualifying patient's certifying healthcare provider. You cannot be the healthcare provider and the personal caregiver at the same time. You see the conflict of interest? But a visiting nurse, a personal care attendant, home health aides providing care to registered qualifying patients, they may serve as personal caregivers, including to patients younger than 18 years old, as a second caregiver. So you can have a second caregiver. You can be a second caregiver as if you're a visiting nurse, personal care attendant, or home health aide. Are you guys following? Just remember, you have to be 21 years old to do this. What else? That's the most important part. What are the responsibilities of a personal caregiver? I mentioned them briefly. You can transport the patient to and from the RMD. You can obtain and transport marijuana from an RMD on behalf of the patient. You can cultivate marijuana on behalf of the patient if the patient has obtained hardship cultivation registration. Now, this does not matter, as we will discuss, if you are 21 and above, because every person in Massachusetts who is 21 and above can have at least six medical marijuana plants in their house, and you can have 12 plants if there are at least 2 adults in the house. So within the adult use context, hardship cultivation doesn't really matter, but if you are 18 to 20, having hardship cultivation does help. Does that make sense? Okay, what else? A personal caregiver can prepare marijuana for consumption, and they can also administer the marijuana to the qualifying patient. What can't they do? Well, they can't consume the weed. You cannot be taking a puff as they take their puff, okay? Unless it's yours. You can't sell or otherwise divert the patient's marijuana. You cannot cultivate marijuana for your own use unless you also have a hardship cultivation, or in this case, this really doesn't matter, because the personal caregiver has to be 21, and so they could grow their own weed anyways. So cultivate marijuana to sell or provide to anyone other than registered qualifying patient. Again, these are all in this section of the law, but if you're 21 years old, again, you can cultivate marijuana and give it to your friends for free. But you cannot do that in the medical marijuana program because it wasn't designed for that. It was designed for your own medical use. You can a personal caregiver cannot allow a qualifying patient who is 18 years or younger, who is younger than 18 years old, to possess marijuana without the personal caregiver being present. So if you're with a 17-year-old, you always have to be there. Where am I? You can't receive payment or other compensation for services rendered as a personal caregiver other than reimbursement for reasonable expenses incurred in the provision of services as a caregiver. Caregiver's time is not considered a reasonable expense. Do you see this, you guys? So caregiving, the time that you spend caregiving you can't charge for it. Oh, where am I? In the case of a visiting nurse, personal care attendant, or home health aide serving as a personal caregiver, the person can receive payment or compensation above and beyond his or her regular wages. Got it? So you can't pay them extra just because they're providing you, they're your caregiver. A personal caregiver has to register with the CCC before they can begin providing these types of services. In order for you to register, you just have to provide all of this information, which isn't that difficult. Your name, like your contact information, confirming that you're 21, just nothing too insane. Let's see. So other limitations on personal caregivers. So a personal caregiver cannot be a caregiver for more than one registered qualifying patient at a time. The only instances of that is if you're a home health aide, you're a nurse, you're, what was that other one? Where is it? You're a nurse, personal care attendant, or home health aide. That's the only instance where you can be a personal caregiver to a second patient. But see, there it is. I had it in the slide and Big Mom went all the way back. Visiting nurses, home health, personal care attendants, and immediate family members can be personal caregivers to more than one patient. But other than that, it's only one. But you guys, the next slide is going to change all of this because the week of August 28th, the CCC actually made some changes to these provisions, and I'm going to talk to you. They haven't gone into effect yet. So currently what I'm teaching you is what's currently in effect. Let's see. If granted a hardship cultivation, the personal caregiver may cultivate marijuana on behalf of the registered qualifying patient only at one location. So you can't have plants at your house and plants at the patient's house. It has to only be at one location. A registered qualifying patient can have up to 2 personal caregivers, and a qualifying patient may add a second caregiver or change personal caregivers by providing notice required for registration of personal caregivers to the CCC. Any questions, you guys? The most important thing I want you guys to remember about this, as the law stands, you cannot be a personal caregiver to more than one qualifying patient at a time, unless you're a nurse, home health aide, or personal care attendant. And you can only cultivate cannabis at one location on behalf of this patient. A qualifying patient may have up to 2 personal caregivers. Okay? Good. Here are the updates as of August 2020. Now, the CCC has expanded the Caregiver Program to allow up to 5 patients and to allow each caregiver to have up to 5 patients and have a canopy of no more than 500 square feet. So now caregivers can have 500 square feet of canopy and have at least 5 patients that they're providing the services to. Also, updates that happen, the caregivers can apply to waive this 5 patient limit, so they may be able to get more than 5 patients. They also have to create a log of growing and make that log available to the CCC, which is pretty reasonable. And this is a big one. Caregivers cannot participate in advertising in Massachusetts now. This literally was approved the end of August. So this is fresh off the press. Why do you think this went into place, you guys? And I want you to keep in mind the conversations we had the first 2 classes. Why do you think people lobbied to get caregivers to be to have the ability to have more than one patient? One of the biggest arguments was the war on drugs. The war on drugs and how difficult it is to actually obtain a marijuana license in Massachusetts. It's a very difficult and cost-prohibitive process to a lot of people. Many people can easily can easily find a 500 square foot facility or grow it in their backyard or do this on a very small scale. but the scale that licensing requires, it prohibits a lot of people who were harmed by the war on drugs from actually participating in the industry. So one of the arguments was this would kind of be a reparative move by allowing caregivers to have more than 5 patients. Perhaps people in the legacy market will be incentivized to transfer into this medical market because the barriers to the caregiver are way lower than adult use. Is it making sense? So this was an equity move, and they were actually trying to expand it to way more than 5 patients. I think they were trying to put at least 10 patients. So the registration for a personal caregiver lasts 5 years, but we'll see what these new when they give us more guidance on these regs, we'll see what the requirements actually are. Okay, hardship cultivation. Do you guys know what hardship cultivation is? Probably, I'm going to tell you. So it's a registration that's issued to a patient because they have a difficulty to access cannabis, either because they don't have any medical marijuana dispensaries around them, or they just physically can't make it to a medical marijuana facility, or they financially can't afford marijuana. So let's talk about it. So to qualify for hardship cultivation, a qualifying patient has to show that they have a verified financial hardship or a physical incapacity to access reasonable transportation. And this can be shown by an inability to use public transportation or drive oneself, or they lack a personal caregiver with a reliable source of transportation, or lack an RMD that will deliver marijuana to the patient's or personal caregiver's primary residence. So there's literally physically, you're incapable of accessing cannabis. Or you lack an RMD within a reasonable distance of the patient's residence. So all 3 reasons are why a patient would be permitted to cultivate cannabis under the medical marijuana program. And again, like I mentioned, this only applies to people who are not 21, because at the moment you hit 21, you can legally have 6 plants in your house and 12 plants if there are 2 adults who are at least 21 years of age. So the limits on cultivation: hardship cultivation registrants cannot purchase marijuana from RMDs, but they can purchase seeds. So once you're allowed to grow your own marijuana under this program, you can't purchase it from from dispensaries. Why? Because then it would make them feel as if you were trying to divert the cannabis to the to the legacy market or to another state. The DPH, I have to change it. The CCC is free to inspect the cultivation site at any time. Cultivation and storage of marijuana must be in an enclosed, locked area that is accessible only to the qualifying patient or his personal caregivers. They can only cultivate at the location specified in the application. They can only cultivate enough product to maintain a 60-day supply. So how much product is that? Anybody remember how much product is a 60-day supply? Now, if anybody said 10 ounces, you're right. And I heard y'all. So you can only grow enough for a 10-day supply. Now, like I mentioned before, that's a trick question, because your certified healthcare provider can say 10 ounces is insufficient for you. You actually need 20 ounces. So the 60-day supply may vary based on what your healthcare provider thinks you need to treat your condition. At any location, cultivation can only occur pursuant to one hardship cultivation registration, absent proof that more than one registered patient resides at the location. Is this making sense to you guys? You following? I hope so. So to register, it's simple. You don't really need to know. You don't really need much. There's a fee. The fee can be waived. They're going to ask you for a bunch of information on your contact information. They're going to ask you to talk about, to explain why you lack the ability to obtain marijuana. Like, why do you need hardship cultivation? Talk about the address and the location where you're going to be cultivating your products. Explain how the patient is going to comply with the law, describe your security system. You don't have to describe your security system in the adult use regulations, by the way. Here comes the spike. And written acknowledgement of the limitation on authorization to cultivate, possess, and use. So you have to just agree to the limitations that we've talked about. Does that make sense? Good. And your hardship cultivation registration is good for 1 year, but it can be renewed. All right, so what did we talk about so far? We talked about certifying healthcare providers, and there are 3 types. We got the certified nurse practitioners. We got the physicians. We got the physician's assistants, right? We talked about those 3. Then we talked about a written certification. A written certification is required in order for you to be a qualifying patient. And we talked about qualifying patients. We talked about the 2 types. You're either 18 years old and above, which is super easy. You can get any of the CHPs to register to give you registration, and all you have to have is debilitating condition. Or you could be 17 and younger, where you need where you need 2 physicians, right? Not just any CHP. You need 2 physicians to certify that you have a debilitating medical condition and that it's life limiting if you are under 17, right? Remember all that? We went through it. And then we just went through hardship cultivation. Now we're at registered marijuana dispensaries. Do you guys have it in you to keep going? You said I have no choice, Big Mama. Your class said it's from 8 to 9:15. I hear you. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna try to finish a little bit earlier today, but I always make those promises. What's an RMD? A registered marijuana dispensary. They're also known as marijuana treatment centers. So the RMD is the old school name for it. I didn't put the name up here, but marijuana treatment center, you guys, MTCs. What are they allowed to do? They can dispense, cultivate, and prepare marijuana. So a marijuana dispensary, an RMD or an MTC, has to be vertically integrated. What does that mean, you guys? Are you guys familiar with vertical integrated models of business? If you're not, I'm going to put you on the game. Vertical integration means that you do everything from seed to sale, meaning that you cultivate the marijuana, you package the marijuana, you make infused products you make your own infused products, you retail it yourself, you transport it yourself. So it's you have to do every single aspect of this business on your own. And this vertical integration requirement is why I was a little mad about this medical marijuana program. Because in order for you to be vertically integrated, your startup costs are going to be ridiculous. Okay? What is the average startup cost for a vertically integrated medical marijuana business? Does anybody know? Does anybody want to know? It's around $9 to $10 million for a medical marijuana facility, because you have to be vertically integrated. And $10 million is low. It's low, especially if you want to build a larger cultivation facility. But we can talk about numbers later. I give my numbers out freely. People are so stingy with their numbers. I'm like, dude, I can give you my numbers. It took me 3 years with these numbers to get licensed. Don't be that stingy. Help people out. All right, are you ready? Let's keep going. So you have to be vertically integrated. You can only have 3 locations though. So under the medical marijuana program, you're allowed to have you can have 2 locations, and out of those locations, you can do 2 activities in one and have one in the other. Am I making sense? I feel like I just confused myself, so I'm going to repeat that for you guys. So under the medical marijuana program, you may only have 2 locations where marijuana is either cultivated, MIPs are prepared, or marijuana is sold. The way that businesses usually separate their business activities between these 2 locations is they usually do cultivation and product manufacturing at one location, and then they'll have one independent retail store. You'll see this, like, has anybody been to Brookline in Netta? Netta in Brookline? So if anybody's been to Netta in Brookline, they have a facility there that's just retail, but then in Franklin, Massachusetts, in Forge Park, they have their cultivation facility there. So that's what a lot of these vertically integrated businesses do. My business also is vertically integrated, but it's not in medical. We took the same concept, but we were able to break it down into smaller phases because we didn't have to do it all at one time. It ended up being easier, and because you don't have to raise as much money at once. And we can talk about that later. Let's see. So each of these activities can only occur at one such location. So you can't say I have 2 locations, so I'm going to retail in both locations. You got to pick where each of those activities are taking place. General requirements to be an RMD, you have to be in good standing with the Secretary of the Commonwealth. So you have to be from Massachusetts. There are control and ownership limitations. So no exec, member, or entity or any entity owner controlled by an such exec or member may directly or indirectly control more than 3 RMDs. So there's a 3 RMD limit in Massachusetts. RMDs must make vaporizers. That was pretty interesting when I first went through. I'm like, why are they requiring us to make vaporizers? And then they went off and banned vaporizers. And now vaporizer, and then vapes are okay again. All dispensary agents, a dispensary agent is what they call employees of dispensaries. They all have to be registered with the CCC. And dispensaries, medical dispensaries, have to have programs to provide reduced cost or free marijuana to patients with documented, verified financial hardship. So that's different than the adult use market where they don't have to provide you any, actually, they're not permitted to provide you any discounts or reduced costs. But the RMDs they are required to have a program for those who have verified financial hardship. And that makes sense, right? Because you don't want someone to not be able to get medicine simply because they can't afford it. At least one exec in the entity must register with Massachusetts Department of Justice for in order to be able to use the iQuery to conduct the background search. Any questions? Vertical integration requirement. Oh, also, did I put it in here? Do you know the other reason why I hated the medical marijuana program? So not only do you have to be vertically integrated, so for the first location that you want to apply for, you have to show that you have $500,000 in liquid assets sitting in your bank account. So this is to apply, this is just to begin the application process. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get through the licensing process. Why is that an issue? Well, if you're trying to raise money just to go through licensing, a lot of investors are not going to take that risk of letting you hold $500,000 just for you to go through licensing. That could take a year, that could take 2 years. So it was just not a great program for Big Mama, which ended up making me be a little spicy. All right. So grounds for denying or revoking registration of your RMD is if you do not open within the time that you promised them that you would when you submitted your application. If you provide inaccurate or incomplete or fraudulent information in your application, if you obviously fail to comply with laws, if you fail to submit a plan of correction. A plan of correction is if you get in trouble, the CCC is going to ask you to provide a plan to correct it. If you do not submit that plan as required or you don't implement that plan, that will be ground for denying or revoking your registration. You cannot assign or attempt to assign your registration without getting permission, so that's another ground. And if you have been shown to be irresponsibly operating your dispensary, so if you're incompetently or negligently operating, you fail to maintain the RMD in a clean, orderly, or sanitary fashion, or you allow a person to use a registration card belonging to a different person. Those are all grounds to revoke your registration. What else? Also, if you don't have enough resources to meet your startup requirements, I actually had some clients who were unable to, who actually had their registration revoked because of this startup cost requirement issue. Yikes. So if you go bankrupt and the executives of the RMD, they have substandard levels of compliance with the statutes and the regulations dealing with this industry, dealing with the operation of their healthcare facility or another facility. So somebody asked me earlier a question about how one license type can impact another license type. Was this here or was this another class I was doing today? I think it was today. It was in this course. So this is where, if you are dealing in the healthcare facility, say I'm a medical doctor and I get in trouble for say I'm an exec in a medical facility and I get in trouble for violating the statutes or regulations that has to do with the healthcare facility, that can be grounds for impacting my medical marijuana business license. Do you see that? It's like, dude, this has nothing to do with you. Get out of here. But the CCC will look into that. And it doesn't matter if it's in this jurisdiction or another jurisdiction. All right. Other reasons, if you have a history of if the dispensary agent has a history of criminal conduct, if you're helping to commit crimes in the operation of the RMD, like you're actually helping El Chapo and it's not really you don't really own it. All right. So the registration for the RMD is 1 year. You renew them annually. Any questions about RMDs? I blew through them. Marijuana treatment centers is what they call them too. MTCs are RMDs. They both mean the same. Good. Remember I defined this term dispensary agents at the beginning? What is a dispensary agent? It's this happy guy. A dispensary agent basically is it's a board member, director, employee, exec, manager, or volunteer of an RMD or MTC. So a dispensary agent is just everybody. Everybody an MTC agent or a dispensary agent. Employee includes even a consultant or contractor who provides on-site services to the RMD related to cultivation, harvesting, preparation, packaging, storage, testing, or dispensing of marijuana. So the reason why this is important is because every dispensary agent has to be listed on the application. So all your board members, directors, employees, executives, managers, or volunteers have to be listed on the application. Why is that important, y'all? Many people do not want to be placed on these applications because they're public records. And they either have jobs where they don't want to be involved with this, or for many other reasons. I know many people who don't want to be on applications because of this reason. So be mindful who is a dispensary agent and whether you have to disclose them. So to be a dispensary agent, most importantly, you have to be 21 years of age and you cannot have committed a felony drug offense in Massachusetts or violations of those those types of laws in another state or territory of America. Yeah, we don't need to go through it. Well, the most important thing that I need you to know about registration is that you have to have a query, you have to have your a background check done. And I'm trying to see what's important for you guys to know for me, because the reason is because the adult use regulations, they mimic the medical regulations a little bit, And I don't want to bore you guys with things that I'm going to go in depth with when I go into adult use. Dispensary agent is for 1 year. One thing I want you guys to know, in order for you to work at a dispensary, you have to register and you have to go through training and you have to have a background check done. So when you're thinking about operating your business and you're thinking about human resources, you can't just fire people because you can't just hire people. It's not easy. You can't just walk out the street and say, hey, do you want to come be my bud tender? And then they're working the following day. It can take up to 3 months to onboard somebody in this process because of the background check, because of the application, because of this registration. So you want to make sure when you're operating or when you're advising your clients that you make sure that they have enough people on rotation to ensure that if somebody has to leave, get fired, or something happens, that you are great. And the way they do that is by maintaining a lot of people as part-time employees and keeping them on payroll. So if you have more than enough part-time employees, if one full-time leaves, you'll be able to deal with that. All right. Do you guys know what an independent testing laboratory is? Okay, I just heard somebody say, Laury, stop asking me if I know something. If I knew it, I wouldn't have taken this class. Keep that spice to yourself, B. Okay, I'm just trying to make conversation. Okay, an independent testing laboratory are the laboratories that are qualified to test marijuana in the Commonwealth for medical marijuana. A laboratory has to be granted a certificate prior to register before they can start testing. An independent testing laboratory cannot cultivate marijuana. They can't possess it, transport, or process marijuana for any other purpose than for testing. Also, if you own an independent testing laboratory, you cannot own an interest in any other marijuana establishment. So you got to choose. Do I want to own a testing laboratory, or do I want to own a marijuana retailer or dispensary or any other license type? But once you're an independent testing laboratory, you can't do anything else. And those an employee, executive, etc. of a laboratory, they're called laboratory agents instead of dispensary agents. But nonetheless, they have to go through that same registration process. So you have to make sure that your HR is on point. And that is all I have for you guys for that is a medical marijuana program in a nutshell. And I am proud of myself because this is the least spicy that I've ever been. And I think it's because I'm not in person. Just kidding. But do you guys have any questions about medical marijuana? I will give you one last bit about what's happening because I got to give you the tea before it happens. So this vertical integration requirement is something that people are really fighting to break. And so in the next year or two, we're probably going to see medical marijuana be broken into individual license types, just like medical marijuana. I'm sorry, just like adult use. And that's it. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the operational requirements for a medical marijuana dispensary. And that is where a lot of you guys, if you want to go into compliance, you're going to spend a lot of your time, because you're going to be making sure that your clients, that their operation is compliant with what I'm going to be talking about next week. And that's it. I hope you guys have a great week. If you guys need anything, let me know. I am going to upload this sometime this week. And that's it. Enjoy. Oh, I almost forgot. Freedom Rally. Do you guys know what the Freedom Rally is? The Freedom Rally is something that usually takes place at Boston Commons, right across the street from our school, but this year it's virtual. It's an event that's been taking place for, I think, like the past 30 years at least. People used to go on the Commons. They would talk about marijuana legislation, marijuana regulation. If you guys are around, I'll probably send you guys the link. The event is taking place on Friday. There's also NECAN. Are you guys familiar with NECAN? NECAN is a New England Cannabis Convention that is taking place tomorrow, actually, and I'm speaking at it. I'm going to try to see if I can get a link and send you guys the link. NECAN is a great opportunity for you to learn about the industry firsthand and meet some people. I don't know how networking is going to work this year. You guys are going to have to be creative with networking, meaning if you find somebody in there that you like, if you go to NECAN or you go to any event, make sure you follow up with those people, because that's literally how I got into the industry. Yeah, so I'll try to keep you guys posted with events. Sorry, I failed on this one. I should have given you guys a heads up earlier. But there are a lot of events happening, and I will be sending links out to them. Go to as many as possible to get to know as many people as you can, because the industry is still very, very, very small, and there's still a lot of opportunity for you guys. Okay, that's it for me, you guys. Have a great one, and I will talk to you next week.